good morning, everybody. Bon matin à tous. David O'Neill here, Corporate Connections President for Canada. Very happy to have you on the call and listen to our latest featured speaker, Elke Steinwender from Mayudic. Elke is a Montreal-based Corporate Connections member, and we're delighted to have her on today. So just before we start, from a legal perspective, we will be recording this session, and recording will be made available to our members in the next 3 days. So by Monday morning, you will have it available. And we will be releasing some of the content through our various social media and other communications channels. So if I can just kick us off by introducing today's keynote speaker, Elke, just a fantastic individual and a very experienced marketing strategist. Elke has over 20 years now of international experience facilitating change, and she really founded her business, I think, on the belief that dialogue empowers, and it empowers obviously teams, employees, companies, and ultimately it dictates the consumer experience. In terms of her background, she's worked with some quite large organizations internationally, and some other smaller ones that you may have heard of, such as NASA, McDonald's, Time Magazine, and other multinational firms. And it's really been about solidifying their brand, empowering their teams with customer knowledge, and how to break down the silos between different departments, different business units, whilst trying to foster a holistic culture that is focused on consumer experience. So very relevant for today's discussion, which is all about how to rethink the consumer experience and what the questions you may need to answer today to drive your business's growth tomorrow. In terms of her business over the last 8 years, Elke and her team have driven strategic change for over 200 businesses across 3 continents. And today she's really going to be answering, or asking, I should say, the key questions that business leaders need to ask themselves in terms of how to adapt their customer experience and ultimately their business model to the new realities that we're facing right now, both I think socially and economically. So Elke, welcome, and thank you for taking some time to join us this morning.
Thank you very, very much. I'd really like to thank Corporate Connections for giving me the opportunity to speak today. And really, the whole entire series of speakers have been phenomenal. So I'm a little nervous and happy to be part of them. So I'll hopefully bring you as much as value as I can, and I appreciate the time that you've sharing with me today.
We're delighted to have you with us, Elke. So perhaps if we can just sort of start off with you know, a simple question. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be you get into this field and became focused on the consumer experience as a whole.
Yeah, so I've always been passionate about marketing. I studied it in university. I read books upon books. And when I graduated from university, I had 2 options, you know, with the degree that I had. One was to work in agency, and the other one was really to go into sales. And I had a young child at the time, and the concept of work-life balance wasn't very in. This was like 25 years ago, and that whole notion really wasn't there. So I wanted to have a career where I could manage a bit my hours. So I started working at a call center. So I was essentially starting by managing the customer and the employee experiences as well. And basically it was managing the employee experience, when, pardon the expression, when it all went to hell. Like, it was very hard. Nobody was happy when they ended up calling us. And by the time they got to me, they were really, really, really not happy. But what it gave me was an opportunity to teach myself and also my team members what it really means to be of service. We live in a very individualistic time, and that notion of being of service to others is something that I find as a value is getting lost or is seen a bit in a negative light. But that having that ability to say, I'm sorry this happened to you, and how can I help? And doing it day in, day out, and truly meaning it was really a huge lesson in humility. You know, when you get out of university, you think you have everything figured out. And it was a huge lesson in humility and how important it is to connecting with others. And surprisingly, I actually loved the job because of that connection. I loved the people that we worked with, the bonds that we had were really tight. And it was also one of the first times that I realized how marketing promises are broken. Like what the customer was promised in the marketing and sales process and what they actually lived once they purchased the product and service. And there was oftentimes a disconnect between the two. I mean, I wouldn't have had a job in a call center if there wasn't that disconnect. And what I realized also early on is that oftentimes the disconnect is structural. Departments, whether that's sales, marketing, customer service, operations, often work in silos, and they don't always are in touch with the end customers. And basically for the rest of my career, I've tried to break down those silos. And I was really lucky and to be working with organizations that were really open-minded, progressive. I had a seat at the executive table at age 25. I was I was very pushy. I wanted to get in there and I lobbied everybody who was sitting at the seat. And my sales pitch was, I'm not going to say a word. I don't want to, this is not a tribune. I want to learn by osmosis. And I honestly don't understand why there's not somebody sitting at that table that doesn't represent the voice of the customer. Like, I don't understand. And I think it was so genuine, or by my persistence of not letting go, they let me sit there. And I have to say, I had no real power or influence, but I learned a lot about business. And I also learned how those silos are created and the realities that each of them are faced. Every department has their own reality, and each of those impact the customer in a different way. And trying to really balance those out within an organization is really hard. It's a hard thing to do from an organizational standpoint. And what I learned over the years is that marketing is the promises that you make to your customer, and a brand is actually a representation of the promises that you've kept over time. Your reputation, your brand is the promises that you keep. And our role as a business leader, my role as an entrepreneur, is to make decisions around strategy, function, people, and others. And that, to honor those promises, we do that essentially by the decisions that we make as business leaders.
I think it's a really interesting concept, and certainly resonates a lot with me personally. You know, that the idea that, you know, we all like to think of ourselves in a certain way as business leaders, our businesses itself, and having that important difference between, you know, what is marketing, what are the promises that you intend to make, and what your brand is in terms of those that you're actually able to keep. So in terms of the decisions side of things, from your side, Elke, what are some of the decisions that we need to make to adapt our customer experience to this new reality that you know, almost all of us are now in as business leaders?
Yep. Well, kind of before getting into the decisions that we need to make to kind of reinvent that customer experience and adapt to the right circumstances, I think we have to make sure that we're asking the right questions. And Mayutic, other than being slightly hard to pronounce, is also the name of our company, but also the Socratic method. That is the art of bringing individuals through dialogues, questions, discussions to uncover and kind of formulate the truth that lies within. And our role as facilitators at Mayutic, and our role as business leaders, everyone, is not necessarily to have all the answers or solutions, but to ask the right questions. And there's huge power in asking the right questions, because it implies kind of inherently that you may or may not know the answer. It implies that you're asking somebody within your team for help. And by asking for help, you're gaining those insights that they have on their vision of the customer. And it helps to make sure that the decisions you make aren't kind of going into your blinders, that you have like kind of your established paradigms of, and those established paradigms may not hold true in our new reality. So I think by asking the right questions, there's a lot, finding the right answers becomes a lot easier to make those decisions right after.
Absolutely, and I certainly understand what you mean when you talk about the power of asking the right questions, particularly as it relates to perhaps some of the businesses that we may interact with on a daily basis, having that silo, those silos exist between different business units, different teams, and so on. So what are some of the questions that we could be asking ourselves, I guess is the logical question in your mind? What should we be asking ourselves right now?
Yep. So, especially in the current crisis, not everyone is affected in the same way. Like some businesses have seen their sales like spike up, others are like complete standstill. And I think for the majority of us, we're kind of within one of those two poles on there. So, depending on where you are in the spectrum today, I really invite you to answer those questions that I'm going to say. Not only from the customer experience, which is the topic of today, but also on a wider scale for your brand, your employees, or any other area of your business to kind of refocus them into where your pain points are. So, and just before I get to the actual questions, I'll just share some operational definitions so that we're all kind of going on the same footing. To me, the customer experience is how you make your customers feel like after you've dealt with them. So how is it, and we've gone through a relationship, we've purchased a service or product, how do you feel after? Is it, wow, that was awesome, I can't wait to deal with the company again? Or, wow, that was a little complicated, like I got what I wanted, but and that is essentially in a nutshell what your customer experience is. Your brand experience, because oftentimes we're talking about, and it gets confusing between marketing and branding and so on, and I like to think of branding as kind of the experience as well. So how do you communicate who you are? How do you want to be perceived in both by your customers and by the greater community? Because especially with the advent of social media and such, they even think of Starbucks. They went from a commodity, which is a product, to an experience. And so branding has really evolved into more of that aspect of it. And the last one is your employee experience. You can't deliver the first two if your people aren't engaged and completely know and share your values and your why. So the 5 questions that I like to ask seem simple, but sometimes they're a little harder to answer, that will help you reinvent the customer experience are: the first one is, are my mission, vision, and values driving my decisions? So oftentimes as business leaders, we get caught up in a problem, right? We're trying to fix a problem that just comes up because they do. And are you making those decisions based on fixing the problem, or are you guiding your decision-making matrix based on your mission, vision, and values? And if you can keep that always top of mind, it makes standardizing your customer experience a lot easier. The second question is, do I truly understand my customers' needs, wants, and desires? Oftentimes I ask people that I know, oh, I know my customer. And then you start kind of digging a bit more and it's like, oh, well, that part I really know, but the other part I don't. And the follow-up questions to that one is really, do you know then, if you know your customer, why do they buy from your competition? So if you can really understand that duality of where your value add is versus where your competition is, it helps you a lot. The third question is, do I truly understand the attributes that kind of define the codes and norms of my market space and how I can challenge them? So there's full of books that talk about this topic. The most common one is Red Ocean, Blue Ocean. You have How Companies Win, you have Uncommon Service. And the idea is, and this relates kind of to the branding experience, how does your industry define itself? What are the norms from a customer service standpoint? And then how can you break those norms? And that's, there's full of examples of companies that have created a love of the brand and a love of the customer experience by breaking institutionalized norms of an industry. The fourth question is, how does blank decision, department, service, product, person impact the customer journey? So the goal of that is to really bring in the employee experience. Does every individual understand how they impact the customer experience? Even somebody in accounts payables and accounts receivables does have an impact on that customer journey, and do people understand where they fit within it? And the last question is, how easy is it to do business with me? How easy is it for customers to find you, to get information from you, to onboard the entire process from A to Z?
So there's a lot of interesting stuff there, and I'm just going to try and unpack a little bit if I can, because you talk a lot about feelings, and I think how we make people feel and is absolutely critical to understand, and that obviously impacts, that obviously refers to our customers, but it also refers to key stakeholders. As you said earlier, departments, whether it be AR or AP, that all has an impact on how you make the customer feel in terms of their engagement with you as a company, as a brand. So I think those are all great questions, and we will be posting those questions in the chat bar for the attendees. And once again, please feel free to put any questions you have to Elke into the question and answer portion of the webinar, which is at the bottom of your screen on a laptop or top of your screen on a mobile device. So in terms of those 5 questions, Elke, where do we start? What are some sort of clear action steps that some of the attendees on the call could maybe have as a takeaway from this segment of the session?
Yep. It may kind of sound a little simplistic, but I would start where it hurts the most. I've seen some of my clients, some in the food industry, have entire segments of their business line wiped out. Anybody who's distributing to restaurants, gone, fini. I've had clients who are in the travel industry and events-based businesses. I mean, complete end, right? Like maybe in September it will come up. Who knows what it will be? And in the case of those individuals, what they had to do was really redirect, right? You instantly, within a 48-hour period, they had to reinvent their business. So not only perhaps their distribution channel had to change in order quickly, but they had to readapt. And the thing within that is that you're probably not the only person who thought of another distribution channel to attack. You're probably not the other person who tried to reinvent themselves. So what was initially maybe a very niche where you were very specified, people are kind of going towards other venues in a quick turnaround fashion. And your first role is not customer experience. It's about going back to your brand experience. So how do you redefine your position in what is probably now an extremely competitive and complex market space? So when you're trying to quickly realign market segments, you start by the brand experience and what market can I exploit and what niche can I effectively position my strengths to that segment. So you can't change who you are, you can change how you redirect your business. And that is by really having a firm understanding of what makes you, what makes you special, what makes you different. And then making sure that your teams can onboard and collaborate and then adapt to your customer's experience. So one of the examples that I had as a customer in the travel business, essentially she created huge events. Like her spring event was the Grand Prix. So she did full of stuff with the Ritz, with different organization, obviously completely down. They had about 10% of their sales traditionally had come from team building events. So what they did is they really repositioned what are the skill set that we are good at. Organizing people, making sure they have fun, making sure that they can collaborate and coordinate each other. So they took their small 10% business and returned it to, let's do online webinars for team building. They send packages, they send stuff to them, and I mean, they signed Air Liquide à Transat, and I'm like, wow, like you're just blowing me out of the sky. And what we did was just take like a half-day session to really understand, here are my strengths. What can I do with this? And that brainstorm just opened up their view tanks to reposition. And in an odd kind of sense, like I think that this crisis created a shift in our habits, right? None of us like changing our habits, but I think we all had to do that. And there's a statistic that I found super interesting from the DAC group that stated that 40% of consumers are now willing to try something new. And as a marketer, that's like a dream come true. Like it's so hard for people to shift brands, to try something new. And now as an organization, you have an opportunity that buyers, let's see what's out there, right? So I think there's something that you can really capitalize on as an organization if you're willing to ask yourself the questions and answer them with true humility and dedication to who you are.
Absolutely, and as you say, it comes from a really deep understanding of how you make people feel after they deal with you, and how you're perceived and how you communicate, and where your strengths lie, and also internally, obviously in terms of the employee experience. How motivated are your employees towards achieving your goal? How aligned are they to your mission, vision, and values, and your why, if you will? What do you see as some of the challenges, some of the roadblocks to business leaders when they're trying to answer these type of questions? Because they are tough questions. And so what have you seen in your experience, Elke, that has prevented or slowed down or stalled business leaders asking themselves these type of tough questions?
Yeah. There are many ways to be answered on that one, but I think if you look at it at a 50,000 feet, is the desire to have a quick fix, silo approach versus approaching the customer experience as a kind of company-wide initiative. And organizations are little ecosystems where everything is interrelated. Adapting your customer experience often impacts many other areas of your business. So for example, we had one customer where we got brought in really by the sales team. The goal was to optimize the customer experience, starting out as sales initiative. And when we started mapping out the customer entire journey from you're not a customer to I've received the package, what we quickly realized that it required change. If you wanted to impact the customer experience, we had to impact change in purchasing, in accounts receivable, and in the way the shipping was done. So the first initiative that we did ended up removing a whole bunch of irritants from the sales process and positively increased sales. The second initiative was much more cross company wide, and that improved the customer experience. The first one removed the irritants, sales increased. The second one positively improved the customer experience. Yeah, sorry, I've got my French catching up with me. Improved the customer experience, and that ended up impacting cash flow because they were able to ship orders faster and get their billing out faster. So sometimes when you understand the true full journey, it does have impact. And these were huge, company-wide. It didn't cost that much money, but what it did, it had a huge impact at both the cash flow, increased sales, but also cash flow, because you could just bill faster and receive faster and collect faster. Those clients were really what I called like the perfect partner, because they had a continuous improvement approach. Like, what can I do better today? And what they realized was that once they got a better understanding of their customer journey, then they could better support that customer. So a few times within the overall project, we had to reprioritize, move stuff away from sales and push it into other departments. And because of the way that we did it, by integrating who knows what point of the customer service, everybody had already been aware of the project. So there wasn't any territorial views of, well, this was my project and resources are pushing over to another. It was just really that vision of seeing the journey as a whole and as a one.
So it sounds like company culture is a key success factor in being able to enable this type of, you know, meaningful change, long-term change, rather than looking for, you know, a quick fix, let's say. So if we're looking, pardon me, towards the future, I'm just conscious that we have a few minutes left in this portion of the session. You know, obviously all your background is marketing oriented. So let me ask you the question: how do you think that marketing will change post COVID-19 and moving forward? What do you see as some of the key things that business leaders need to be conscious of, aware of, in terms of how marketing may evolve in the future?
Yep. That's a question. I'm going to take it at a personal level and then take it kind of as a business. Sure. So as an individual, I have kind of this rebel grassroots, like power to the people mentality. Like I truly believe that every dollar that I spend is a vote that can change the world. Like where I put my money as a consumer can really impact the way that, just think of free, fair trade, right? Like that whole notion of commerce équitable and so on. Like I truly believe that we can change the world with our dollars. And historically, when you look at organizations and brands, like they've had the power to control and shape our vision of what we see as the way we should buy, the way we should be, and just by their sheer weight in media. And everything that has gone digital, like that transition from like Napster to everything on the net should be free, to Wikipedia, of collaboration, to Facebook and other social media channels, have truly shifted fundamentally at a cultural level the power back to the people. And we have this voice that can now be heard. And I think that organizations need to adapt to that. And so I have this like Elke side, like power to the people, and my job in life is to make brands like rule the world, right? Like that's what I'm supposed to do. That's what I work to do, to make them known and so on. So how I've kind of consolidated those two polarities is that my vision of marketing is to be the voice of the customer within the organization. So I believe that that's a trend that's gaining hold more and more. It's still a little kind of marginal, but the notion of B Corps, I don't know if you know what B Corps are. They're kind of like, they're corporate for-profit entities that have essentially higher standards to be met to in terms of transparency, accountability, performance, governance, in their structures for both workers, communities, environment, and so on. So I see that trend as, if there's actual legal denomination to it, to becoming even more like that notion of importance and impact that a corporation has, and integrating the voice of the customer within that. So, you know, I used to manage marketing in 22 countries, and every second Friday I copied Obama. Like this is my little, it makes me happy to say this. Like Obama, what he had done is every, I think it was second week, he had a letter from people who were happy with him, not happy with him, and neutral ones. So I'd ask our customer service department, give me some people that are happy and sad, and I'll call them. And I called different people to just kind of get there. I wasn't there to fix problems. It wasn't about that. It was just, where are you at? And if I can help, I can help. If not, it gave me a better understanding of the reality, the market realities that people were going through. And for a number of years, we're all over that time, and for a number of years, like storytelling has really been the core of marketing. And it still is. Like, I mean, you still have to do it, but I think this push towards organizations' greater, broader view has moved storytelling from story doing. Like, you have to be not only a useful product, but a useful brand to society. And I think that those companies that really take that approach will leapfrog over the competition in years to come. And yeah, there you go.
Really interesting. How do you permeate having the voice of the customer throughout your organization and being, continuously oriented towards how you're making the customer feel and how you're perceived by the customer? And I really like the story of you copying Obama, and I think that's something that we can all potentially learn from. So thank you, Elke. It's already 11:30, so the first portion of the session is now over. We're going to move to the second portion of the session, which is obviously a question and answer piece for around about 15 minutes. So to the attendees on the call, please feel free to put your questions into the chat bar, into the Q&A segment of the webinar. And I know there have been some questions going through the chat bar as we've been going through the first 30 minutes. So allow me to pass this piece over to my colleague, Trevor Butkin, Vice President of Corporate Connections Canada. Elke, thank you once again. Really appreciate you taking the time and some fabulous content there. Thank you. Trevor, over to you.
Thank you, David. And thank you, Elke, for that. That's one of my favorite half an hours I've spent this week is just listening to you talk about brand, and storytelling is obviously a great experience in that as well. And so I love hearing a viewpoint on it that unfortunately not a lot of businesses have. So that's fantastic. The first one, and we'll just kind of touch on what Victoria is asking in terms of when breaking silos and when trying to unite teams around this customer journey or this experience. What are some of the tools that people can use? And she asked specifically on CRM, but what are some of the things that companies can put in place to help mitigate silos or create a better or a faster response to customer needs?
So in terms of hard tools, your CRM is an incontournable. Like, you can't not have a CRM at this point in time, especially if you're going up within the organization. And oftentimes from a licensing standpoint, not everybody, I've seen organizations where not everybody has access to it. And when we're talking about the voice of the customer, the more people can integrate their ERP, so whatever you're using to manage your business, integrate it with your CRM so that that customer knowledge can be shared, right? Remember I was saying, like, invoicing and billing and shipping, like your employees should be able to see what's happening within essentially their overall business. The clients that they're on the phone with or interacting with, here's what they look like. I'm grabbing that person at one point, and here's what they lived in other spaces of the company. So for sure, CRMs are an amazing tool. My only caveat is if your CRM is not mapped to your client, they end up being mapped to your silos. So make sure that when you are organizing your CRM and launching it or readapting it or whatnot, that your processes are aligned to your customer journey and not aligned to your own processes internal, because then you're just recopying the same thing in a different tool. And I think it's what Bill Gates, who says that automating something that doesn't work is like pointless.
It's like reinforcing bad habits.
Exactly.
So in terms of what I love, one of the things that I love of what you talked about today was, and it flows so beautifully from the last two speakers, Lilith, and then also where he was talking about the whys and constantly, asking why until you get through all the easy answers down to the real answer possibly. And then even Brian, last week talking about, questions and the quality of your questions, giving you that. What happens, and these are great, by the way, the 5 questions that you've given us. What happens on question number 1 when, you're asking in terms of, are the mission, values, vision, are they really being aligned with the decisions I'm making, or are my decisions aligned with those? What happens when you go in with your client and realize that everyone is not clear on those mission statement or the vision or the purpose of the company, and everyone kind of is pulling in a different direction? Since that's question number 1, what happens in that case? I
stop. I mean, if you're having those discussions, there's a difference also between I don't know what they are, right? Because sometimes the vision is so, or long and articulate that nobody can actually say it. But if they can actually say it and it sounds like it, I often say, can we just simplify it, because nobody can memorize it, right? It has to be something that people actually can remember. If they're completely off, and that happens oftentimes when companies like industries are consolidating, right? So you're kind of like, when you're growing through acquisition, that's a lot of times when there's different views of how it is. So having that moment, stepping back, saying, let's just put a hold on the project that we started, which was mapping the customer journey to, let's say, implement our CRM. Let's just take 2 weeks, right? 2 weeks ain't going to change the world, but it will change how you implement the project. Because if people aren't aligned, there's two ways of doing change management. You can front end it or you could back end it. If you front end it and align people on mission, vision, values, and what are the objectives of the project, you'll take those 2 weeks, will save you 4 months later on. Because when you start implementing and people just like scatter like cats, projects fail. I think it's about 80% of projects or new initiatives fails within business. And change management, when you're doing it at the end, is almost like a customer service department, right? You're fixing, patching up what you can instead of fixing the problem from the beginning. That doesn't mean it's not hard to implement, but you'll shave weeks off of the implementation process. And taking 2 weeks to just sit down as an executive committee, like do it on a Saturday morning if you have to, but getting alignment on that will also help across all your business decisions and increase, profitability and efficiency.
Now, I come from a hotel background and restaurant background and a bunch of different customer service. And I know like Ritz-Carlton, anytime they have a new employee, they spend 21 days on training before that employee is ever put in front of a guest. So that's 21 days of their cost before that person's even with a guest. How important is, in terms of the follow-up of the work you're doing, of building that sort of accountability or that culture of putting the guest first before necessarily maybe profits or, some of the other things that sometimes we prioritize in our company. So how important does that become for you when you're looking at this?
Well, there's data upon data upon data of how companies who put the customer first end up being more profitable, have larger growth, have less expenses due to employee turnover and so on. So again, it's that quick fix versus a holistic view. So even when you're looking at your business model as an entrepreneur, where are my costs? Right? Where are stuff costing me on an ongoing basis? And those are usually where your patches, you have a tendency to do, like, this is costing me more. I have a high turnover rate. I'm trying to reduce my turnover rate. Well, before just trying to change your recruiting process, perhaps that is the problem and it's not more complicated than that, but perhaps people are also leaving because somewhere along the line they're not being listened to, their training isn't good, their onboarding. So I was talking about the voice of the customer, also the voice of the employee, like they're the people who they run your business, right? So how is it that you're taking care of them to take care of you? So to me, it's like a short-term. And it has to be adapted, of course, to every industry, every reality, but how are you taking care of your employees so that they take care of you after? And your
right.
clients.
So it can be a complete cultural shift then, for a company that may be.
Like, to me, that whole cultural shift is a huge commitment, right? So I rather go with that's why I like the idea of continuous improvement. Saying, like, if you've been in business for 10, 15, 20 years and you need to shift, well, you've done some great stuff already, like, or else you wouldn't be in business. So let's just take everything that you do that's good and just work from there and try to eliminate the rest of it. Like, I have a green belt in Lean Six Sigma, and one of the concepts is waste elimination. But that waste doesn't have to be in, moving paper A to paper B. It could also be in all the processes that you do, and those elements of culture that are hurting you now, that served you at one point in time, but no longer serve you now. And what is it that you need to realign? And usually those changes are harder for top management than it is for lower down, because they're annoyed by all those things
Right.
that are slowing them down to
Right.
help their clients, right? Like, usually
So,
the institution slows down the individual.
right, exactly. So who right now, like what businesses do you see right now are absolutely crushing it in terms of customer experience, and what are they doing differently than their competitors? In your opinion?
Yeah. In terms of customer experience, there's a lot of them. Like, I think what I've been really looking at now is companies that have been adapting to their business model, their, you know, where I was talking to that useful brand versus the useful product. That's where I've been focusing my look throughs. Like, those people who did customer service are still doing the great customer experience, but those who are really leapfrogging are those who are able to see what's going on in their market and take it beyond that. So I have full of examples. So one of them was Pure Vodka in Quebec, who actually changed essentially their product line. There's Bauer, manufacturing of hockey equipment, that moved to face mask. There's Decathlon in France that also moved away. They readapted their product line. There's Good Food that changed. Essentially, they gave back to the community in terms of what they were doing for everybody who was in the restaurant business. So they gave credits to individuals to make sure that they had enough food and so on. So to me, those are the companies that will essentially see a difference in their customer experience, because they're thinking beyond what's in it for me, and they're going beyond that. And a lot of customers right now, when you see the stats, I think it's 67% of individuals want to know how you're treating your employees, how you're treating your community, and kind of judging you on that. So that whole notion of you live in a greater ecosystem is really strong. And I think that is the next step within the crisis situation, right? Like, very important.
That's beautiful. And in terms of, I'm see so many examples of it where it's either pivoting in terms of the product is shifting or a response to that. And I think there's that element of authenticity. And you talked a little bit about that, you know, storytelling versus story doing, or that doingness. It's kind of putting your money where your mouth is as a company, not just giving the marketing kind of lip service.
Yep. And I saw one example where it's McDonald's and Burger King, and they're in Europe. And I don't know if you saw, like, McDonald's separated those arches, like the traditional arches, they moved them away for the message of social distancing, which is great, but that's storytelling. And then you have Burger King that, you know, how you have those ads when you go through the drive-through, like, and it says, like, your burger may cost you $1.30, but what is the real cost of you being out here, and what are you impacting? So they've had people drive away because they're making people really take action. Like, do you really need to be out here and pay and buy my product, or should you be at home? And to me, that's a concrete action versus a nice image type of thing. Like, that is authentic, I think.
Beautiful. Well, I'm going to turn it back to David, so we have a couple more minutes to wrap up. And I just want to thank you for your time this morning and for prepping yourself. And it was fantastic. So
thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Trevor. And you know, some really good points there. Certainly resonating the difference between Burger King and McDonald's, and you gave some great examples there, Elke, of companies that I think are being authentic in terms of what they're doing to tell their story today. So thank you. We are at the end of today's session, so just to wrap it up, once again, Elke, founder and president of Mayudic, thank you very much for your time today. I think it was really great content, and really appreciate you sharing some of your experience and insights with us. Next week's speaker will be Martin Aquilina. Martin is a member of Corporate Connections Ottawa. He's a founding member of that group, which is a new market for us. I'm very excited to launch there shortly. He's also the Chief Operating Officer of Haslo Law and international law expert. So next week's session is going to be really focused on helping business leaders that are currently doing business internationally, whether it be from Canada abroad or companies that are maybe looking at Canada as a destination for their business in terms of setting up a North American presence or refining what they already have here in terms of the operations side and things that business leaders need to think about, risks that Martin and his firm have seen and how to mitigate those. And also, I think be successful quicker and more sustainably internationally. So we will be posting that Monday morning across our various media channels, and excited for next week's session. But just to wrap up today, Elke, a fantastic job. Thank you once again.
Thank you,
for all of your insights, and wishing you all a fantastic Friday. So we will be sharing the content next week, but wishing you all a very good morning or good afternoon and good evening to our attendees from Japan. And once again, thank you, Elke. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Goodbye.
Take care. Bye-bye.